And welcome back to another episode of Primility Primer, our morning reminder of the power of balancing pride and humility as we go about our daily lives. This is episode number 76, and I am your host, Jared Morris. So back in the day, I was a big Seinfeld fan, as I'm sure that many of you were as well. Maybe you still are, catching the reruns on often as they are. But there was an episode called The Opposite. And in this episode, George comes to the realization early on that every decision he's ever made has basically been wrong. And so he's going to start making the opposite decision. So whatever he thinks is the right thing to do in any situation, he's just going to start doing the opposite. And there's a line from this episode that has stuck with me forever. And it hasn't really stuck with me for any specific reason that's relevant to the context of the episode, but it still stuck with me. And I've got a story that kind of illustrates it here in a second. But let me give you the line. So to kind of set this scene up, during the episode, George gets interviewed by the Yankees. And so during the interview, he gets to meet George Steinbrenner, of course, the famed owner of the Yankees, the bombastic, arrogant personality, the guy who just had the reputation for firing people left and right. And so George Costanza meets George Steinbrenner. Steinbrenner says, "It's nice to meet you." And here's how George responds. "Well, I wish I could say the same, but I must say, with all due respect, I find it very hard to see the logic behind some of the moves you have made with this fine organization. In the past 20 years, you have caused myself and the city of New York a good deal of distress, as we have watched you take our beloved Yankees and reduce them to a laughingstock, all for the glorification of your massive ego." And it's that line there at the end, all for the glorification of your massive ego, that has stuck with me. Again, not for this episode itself isn't special to me. In fact, I had to go back and research where this line actually came from. But it's that line right there, all for the glorification of your massive ego, that has stuck with me. And from time to time, I will find myself when I'm thinking about doing something, and obviously this is typically during times when my pride is running rampant, and a little voice inside of my head, this little George Costanza voice, will whisper that whatever I'm doing all for the glorification of my massive ego. And whenever there are moments like that, I recognize that it's time to yank myself back from that side and bring some balance back. Because anytime that we're doing something all for the glorification of our massive egos, which we all have, and I think we all have moments like this, the circumstances and contexts are different for all of us based on our individual personalities and circumstances and life situations, but we all do it. And it's in those times when we need our own little George Costanza in our head to yank us back over and bring some balance back to our thoughts and to our actions. And so I wanted to share a story of how this happened to me recently. And I think I already shared a story of how we had a webinar issue last week. So I was supposed to host a webinar, and the person I was supposed to host it with, he ended up having something come up at the last minute, like literally about an hour before. And so he couldn't join me anymore. And so we still hadn't really had a chance to kind of work through our preparation. It was going to be a little bit of a last minute thing. And so he said, "Can you handle this?" And I panicked for about 5 minutes, like legitimate panic, like, no, saying this to myself, like, I'm not prepared. I don't know what to do with this yet. Like, no. And then I thought, you know what, forget this. Yes, I can. I've still got about an hour and a half. I can get prepared. I can do this. I know this topic fairly well anyway. Give me an hour to cram and put together some slides, and I can do this and field questions. I've got this. And so I started to get excited. And I started to get excited about kind of having this opportunity to step up to my plate all by myself, do it really well, hit a home run. And I started to think about all the things people would say. Hey, Jared didn't panic in this moment when he could have, and he stepped up and he did this himself. And wow, what a great job he did. And I kind of started to get excited about this. Well, after about a half hour, I'm prepared. I've got my slides. I'm ready to go. And I'm kind of visualizing and pre-basking in my own ego glorification, right? Because I'm thinking about how great this is going to go, which, hey, that's an old athlete, psychological tip. When you're going to do something, visualize it going well. So I'm not trying to, criticize myself for any of that. But then one of the most respected people at our company said, hey, do you need help on this webinar? Do you want me to join it with you? And my initial thought, I didn't say this, but my initial thought was, no, I want to do this myself. Like, this is my thing now. I want to be up there. I want to do this me. That was my initial thought. And I didn't say anything. I thought about it, and and part of it was also, this guy's really busy. I knew that it was a big sacrifice for him to ask. And so I really appreciated him asking. And I thought, no, I can do this, both because I want to, and also because I don't want to burden anybody. It wasn't totally just crazy ego based. It was also because I don't want to burden, him with all the stuff he's got to do to have to come onto this webinar last minute. But the more I thought about it, and the more I thought about everyone who would be impacted, the 4,000 plus people, who were attending, obviously, this is a topic that he had a lot of knowledge about. So he could get on, talk about it without doing a ton of preparation, because he's probably talked about it on 1,000 previous webinars. And clearly he was offering, so it wasn't like he didn't have any time to do this. And so I started thinking about the pros and the cons of this. And the con of it, right, of saying no and of me doing it, was pretty much just me over here wanting to be the guy to take the last shot, wanting to kind of be the one to shoulder this entire burden, in part to, to not disrupt anybody else's days, but in another part, all for the glorification of my massive ego, because I wanted to do this myself and get the credit for it, and kind of be seen as, he stepped up in this tough situation. But then you think you've got one of the smartest people in the world about this topic telling you that he will help you, basically offering to help. You've got thousands of attendees who are going to come watch, who would clearly benefit from his insight, because he would make it better with the two of you here. Now, yes, now it's not just me on the stage by myself doing this whole thing by myself, but when you add it up and look at, and what am I going to say? No? I mean, how much of a jackass do I look like when one of the experts in this field, one of the true online experts in this field, is offering to do this, and me, still a novice in some ways, still learning, still, still sometimes doing these things for the first time myself, for me to say no, like, how arrogant would I have to be to do that? And so that initial reaction, that initial emotional reaction of no, I'm glad I didn't act on it, and I'm glad I took a step back. And this is Primility. I mean, yeah, I looked at my wristband a few times when I did this, stepping back and saying, okay, I get it. I get the emotional reaction. I get the excitement at doing this yourself. I get this whole ego thing that's happening here, but step back, assess the situation, add some humility to your thinking. Think about everybody that will be impacted by this and what's best for them, not just what's best for you. And that allowed me to make a much, much, much better decision, because the decision driven by the glorification of my massive ego, maybe it benefits me, but it certainly is only going to benefit me. And stepping back and, combining that pride and wanting to do this great job, and still, wanting to step up and deliver good information and do that. I mean, I'd already done a lot of the work to put the presentation together, all of that, and a lot of that was driven by pride. And that's the good part of pride, man. But I was letting it go too far, and I was about to let it get into that point where it becomes arrogance and vanity and leads to a bad decision. And I'm so glad that I was able to have the self-awareness to step back, understand what was going on in my own head, and make the better decision. And not let being driven by the glorification of my massive ego make that decision, because that's almost never the right decision. So anyway, I just wanted to share that story, because that is a real example just from the past week of Primility really helping me in my own life. And I try as much as I can, whenever something like that happens, and really whenever I have a strong reaction one way or the other, I try now to step back and say, okay, wait, let's embrace this. It's an emotion, so I can't change it. I've just got to embrace it, ride it out, and then when it's over, let's be ready to make the right decision. And in this case, it was to embrace the emotion, ride it out, and realize it was leading me down a path I didn't want to go down. So let's just reverse that and make that next decision take us down this path, which is better for everybody, and really that's how we want to make our decisions, is what's the decision right now that provides the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And I think when we do that, that's going to drive us toward good decisions, put us in a position to have a better impact, not just on our own lives, but on other people's lives. So that's my story. If you have any recent stories of Primility helping you overcome the drive that we all have sometimes to glorify our own massive egos, I'd love to hear them. Email me, jared@primility.com, or we have a Facebook group, and we always invite you to come there, primility.com/Facebook. Just request to join. I will accept you. It's a private group, and I've only given it out on a few episodes, so I will know that you have listened to episodes of Primility Primer if you join. So go in there, join the discussion, and I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you listening, and we'll be back tomorrow with another brand new episode of Primility Primer. In the meantime, stay cognizant of your pride and your humility. Wrist bump.